Hey there, it's Lenny Magill with the Glock Store Performance and Custom Shop here in the new studio in Nashville. In fact, this is the very first video that I'm doing in the new studio. And we've kind of got it together. We're going to layer it up as time goes by. But hopefully when you come to the store to visit here in Nashville, you can take a tour of the building and you'll come right through here. And maybe I'll be here and you can actually take a picture with me. So, all right. Today's video is going to be about the Pyramid Trigger. Many of you have ordered a Pyramid Trigger and we haven't been able to deliver the full set because the trigger housing from Glock is very hard to get. In fact, we can't get them. So this video is to show you how to install the Pyramid Trigger using your existing trigger housing. All right, that's what it's all about. So of course, the Pyramid Trigger, as you know, is one of our most popular products. It is a fantastic upgrade for your Glock. It's going to give you a lighter, shorter, crisper trigger pull with a better reset, which is going to make you a better shooter, to be quite honest. And that's what it's all about. So first of all, we're going to go ahead and install this on a Glock 19 Gen 3. It's going to be the same principle for any of the Glocks, really. Just this is the gun we're going to use. Obviously, whenever you pick a gun up out of a box as a brand new Glock, I'm going to drop the magazine, inspect the magazine is in fact empty. I'm going to go ahead and pull the trigger, or excuse me, pull the slide back, inspect inside the slide, make sure it is empty, and then pull the trigger in a safe direction. And now we have an empty gun and we can actually work on it. So let me go ahead and put the box away. To do this procedure, you really don't need a whole lot of tools. All you really need is a punch. However, a little hammer is always nice and necessary sometimes. And a flathead screwdriver sometimes is nice and necessary too. But you can do everything really with a punch if you know how to do it. And of course, that's what this video is all about. So this is my armorer's block, just a roll of tape. What's nice about this, you can put the gun on it, it doesn't damage the gun at all. And you actually have some space. Here's how we're going to work on this. The first objective is to take the slide off of the gun itself. And that's done by taking your grip, rolling your hand up on top, like so, and then we're going to go ahead and access the slide lock, which is on both sides. It's a bar that runs through. It's spring activated. So I've got to take a little pressure off of it to be able to activate the spring. So I just pull it back just a little bit, and if you can see right there, really it's about 1/4 of an inch. Just a little bit right there. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is reach up while I keep that back and pull down on the slide lock both sides with my fingernails. And once I hold it down, then I can let go and the slide will come off, just like that. That's the upper, that's the lower. We're going to be working on the lower because we're working on the trigger. And we'll get back to this when we work on the safety plunger and the firing pin spring. So I'm going to put this off to the side right now, just so we don't have to worry about it. Now, there are 3 pins in this gun. It's a Gen 3 and Gen 4 guns both have 3 pins. It's the trigger pin, the locking block pin, and then the trigger housing pin back here. Trigger pin, locking block pin, trigger housing. The Gen 5 guns have just the trigger pin and the trigger housing pin. They did away with the locking block pin, which is, somehow in their mind is a good idea because, obviously what happened in the early days is they came out with the original Glock only had the trigger pin and the trigger housing pin, and they found they were cracking slides and cracking these pins. So they added that extra pin for a little bit more rigidity. Somehow when they developed the Gen 5, they decided, hey, we don't need it. And so that's one of the changes in a Gen 5. This is a Gen 3, there's a Gen 4 as well. We'll have the same pin combination. So we've got our 2 pins here. We're going to go ahead and start on the locking block pin. I'm going to take a 3/32 inch punch and go ahead and take out the locking block pin. Now it typically comes straight out. This gun is new, so I'm going to use a hammer just to get it out of there, get it started. Oops, come on out. And there we go. Now what's nice about this donut or roll of tape is that it will capture your pins and you won't lose them. That's really important. Now that I've got the locking block pin out, I can actually manipulate this a little bit better, and I should be able to just get this out with hand pressure. So I'll get a punch on top of here, manipulate this guy a little bit and see if I can get it to come out quickly. Well, this is a stubborn one, so we're going to get back on it here with the right hand. There we go. Okay. So it is tough sometimes, especially the first time with a brand new gun. It gets to be a little tight. You can see it's halfway out. I can usually go over here with my hand and pull out the rest, just drop it inside. So I think the key there is going to be to take out that locking block pin first, which gives us a little bit more play with that whole piece. And you'll see this piece will just drop straight out. That is your factory slide stop. We're going to go ahead and take out now the trigger housing pin. And this just pushes straight out. And again, this is the plastic pin. The other ones are steel. And we do sell steel pin kits. And there's the 3 pins right there. Now here, I want you to notice this real quick. The locking block pin is kind of a dumbbell shape, has 2 little pieces on it to kind of keep it in the frame. I don't know if you can see that really closely, but it does have a little edge on it. And it's just right here, it's just like a dumbbell shape. The trigger pin is the one with the notches in it. And here's how this works with the slide lock or slide stop. It goes in and it locks into one of those notches. So what we're trying to do is get it off that notch. And once it gets off the notch, it gets, kind of comes out fairly easily. But the spring pressure of this piece of the slide stop is what keeps it on the the trigger pin. And pretty incredible how simple but effective it is. So now all of our pins are out. I'm going to drop them back in my donut. The factory slide stop, I don't want to lose that. And now we're going to go ahead and remove the locking block itself. Typically, you can go in here with a punch and just kind of lift it straight out. So we'll start it, and it'll come up, and here it comes. Sometimes they're tight, especially when they're new. There's your locking block for a Glock 19. And this is the one item that will be different for gun to gun, the locking block itself. We'll drop that in there. Now that I've taken that out, I can actually go ahead and just pull the entire trigger right out. And here it comes. And there's your stripped frame somewhat. The piece that remains in here is the slide lock. And you'll notice that slide lock is the bar, and that is spring loaded right there. I can pull it down on both sides as well, or I can just push it down here. And that actually is the heart of the gun, because without that, the slide just comes right off. So we'll leave it there because we're not going to play with it. We do sell an extended version of this, which makes it a lot easier to manage without really tearing up your fingernails. So that's our precision extended slide lock. All right, now that we'll have that done, I'm going to go ahead and just show you this trigger bar and the trigger housing and the whole mechanism here and how it sits. You're going to notice the connector right here that's embedded into the trigger housing. So what we're asking you to do is use your existing trigger housing to install the trigger. And here's how we're going to do that. First of all, we're going to take the trigger off of the trigger housing. And you'll see that it's spring loaded with the trigger spring that is captured in the trigger housing back here. And it's inside there. You'll see that spring when you're playing with it. So the spring pressure is this way. And there's the spring. So you pull it out a little bit against the spring and twist it. And the whole thing will come right out. And there's this spring. Now here's what's really important. You want to observe this spring as you do. As you look at it, you'll see that it's an open-ended spring on both sides. The open ends create an S. So when you install it, when you go back to reinstall it, you want to make sure that you have that S shape. It's captured on the trigger bar with a little hole right back there. And I'm going to go ahead and take this guy off. Now it's just captured. It barely fits in a sense. You kind of have to bend the spring a little bit to get it out, but once you get it up there, it'll come off. And so I got to kind of look at it closely here so I can see what I'm doing here. Okay, now I took it off the trigger housing, and on the back of the trigger housing, you're going to notice the hole back here. And it's black on black, so it may be hard to see, but there's a hole right there. See, there you go. That's where you capture the open end of this spring inside the actual trigger housing. See that open end? Let's see if I can show you that real quick too. There you go. That's the open end. So now we want to take the other side off of here real quickly. And that comes up like that and out. Come on. Come on, there you go. That's the trigger spring. And that's the trigger bar. and the trigger shoe. And this is called the bird's eye, in a sense, because it sticks up. And this one rolls over top of the safety plunger on the slide. And the cruciform back here is what actually grabs hold of the striker lug. So if we take the actual upper, you'll notice the striker lug we just talked about. So when you pull the trigger, you actually pull this back a little bit, and it's spring loaded, and then the striker, or excuse me, the trigger bar falls off of this and it snaps forward, so it goes like that. Now, the safety plunger will prevent the striker from going forward. So unless you depress it, and that's what the bird's eye does. So as you pull the trigger, you depress the safety plunger, and that allows the striker to move forward, just like that. That's kind of all the inner workings of how this Glock fires. You pull the trigger, and as you pull the trigger, the back end of this cruciform, the whale tail here, basically pulls back on the striker lug. And as it pulls back, then this part of the trigger bar intersects with the connector. And then you see the shape of the connector, see how it falls down? It actually hits here and falls off that part. So you'll see the angle there. So the bar comes back, hits there, falls off, and when it falls off, that's what allows the striker to go forward. Pretty ingenious, really. So what we're going to do now is replace the factory connector with the parts that come in your pyramid trigger to make it a better, shorter, lighter, crisper trigger pull. But first I want to show you one other thing. This is called the ejector. And it actually is a separate piece. Although most trigger housings come with the ejector installed, you can actually take a pair of pliers and pull this straight out. It's a stamped piece of metal. Now, you're also going to notice here for a 9mm, it's very important that you'll see that it's slightly bent in. Now, if you visualize that in your mind, it's bent in to actually intersect with the casing of a 9mm round. Whereas the .40 caliber always looks very similar. Everything's similar except this ejector part is actually straight. And if you think about that, the reason it's straight is because the .40 caliber casing is larger, so it doesn't have to bend in. So one of the things you want to be aware of too is that you don't want to use a 9mm ejector with a .40 caliber round because it could possibly reach far enough in to intersect with a primer. Okay, so it's very important that you always, kind of are aware. A lot of people have called us in the past and said, "Hey, that ejector looks, well, I guess they'll say bent. Can I straighten it out?" And we say, "Oh, well, no. If it's shooting 9mm, you can't." Now, 9mm is bent on purpose. Let's just keep it that way. Okay, so don't try to bend that and change it. If you want to shoot .40 caliber, you should have a .40 caliber ejector. If you want to shoot 9, have the 9 ejector. Although the .40 caliber ejector will still eject 9mm rounds. We just don't want to use a 9mm ejector in a .40 caliber gun. So to take the connector out, we're going to go ahead and use a flathead screwdriver. And you can do this with a punch, by the way. You can come on the other side and actually punch it out right here. So if you wanted to do it that way, that's one way to do it. I actually, just like to get under here with this flathead, get down to the base, and just twist the flathead a little bit. You'll see it come straight out. Just like that. And then I can pick it up, and you'll see that there is a short leg and a long leg. And that's the connector. So we'll put that down there like so. All right, so there's the trigger housing, and you're going to take it and strip it with the parts, and you're going to use it again with the parts that come in the pyramid trigger. So since we're not going to use these Glock factory parts, I'm going to put them off to the side, and I'm going to go ahead and address the pyramid trigger. Comes in a box, just like that. And we'll go ahead and take it off, and you'll see the trigger itself. I've got a gold one today with the gold bar. Now the bar is coated in TIN. And that gives it a little bit more lubricity, frictionless motion, than the actual factory trigger bar. And because of that, again, you've got parts and pieces, connecting and rubbing against each other. this has a lower coefficient of friction, and it reduces some of the drag that you'll feel with the trigger. So once you get the trigger bar out, you can pick this piece up, the insert here, and we're going to look inside, and we're going to find all the springs we're going to deal with. Now, we give you a variety of different springs to adjust the trigger to the way you like it. I'm going to use a 3-pound trigger spring today, or actually that's a 3-pound firing pin spring. And then we're going to use the extended power trigger return spring. Now, people, sometimes think, well, trigger spring, what does that mean? Is that the trigger spring that I'm pulling? No, actually, the trigger spring returns the trigger back to action, back to battery. So that's that small little spring we're just talking about. We include with the pyramid trigger a more powerful or extra power spring because we want it to reset faster so you can shoot faster. So that's what you get, as well as you get the double diamond 3.5-pound connector. So here's the double diamond 3.5-pound connector. You'll see it's got the 2 diamonds on it. Our connector is geometrically shaped to allow the trigger bar to fall off a little faster. So the angle right here is a little different, a little less of an angle. So the trigger bar will actually come off faster. Okay? Actually, it's more of an angle, I guess is the word, because it comes off in a, you don't have to pull it back all the way. You pull it back here and then it falls off. All right? And it's coated in NP3, and the NP3 is known as a very low coefficient of friction, much lower than just about anything else, even better than the TIN. It is really one of our best-selling items. If you do anything to your gun, even if you don't have a pyramid trigger, drop in one of these 3.5-pound connectors, you'll get a great result. Like I said, we have an extra power trigger spring, and you're going to notice there's your open ends, and you're seeing that S shape, and that's how we want to install it. So let's just look at it again. S, and all the way down here. So we start with the S up here. We want to make sure it goes into the gun like that. And then the last thing we'll install is the actual firing pin spring and the safety plunger. And I'll show you those in just a second here. Here's the firing pin spring. That's a 3-pound firing spring, pin spring. It is labeled 3 pounds. So you'll be very able. We have a couple different springs we give you. We give you here's a 4-pound spring, here's a 4.5-pound spring, and here's a 6-pound spring. So all 3 of these are options for you. We also have a 2-pound spring. Now that's for a lot of our competition shooters who really want a super light trigger pull. Again, when you pull that trigger, you're kind of pulling that spring back. So the lighter the spring, the lighter the pull. We still want it to come all the way back, and a lot of our competition shooters really want that light trigger pull. If you're a self-defense shooter, the 3.5 or the 3-pound or the 4-pound spring will be a great option for you. So I'm going to install the 3-pound spring today. Okay, the last thing I want to show you before we get into the installation is the actual plunger, safety plunger itself. And you'll notice a couple things about it. One, it is coated in the TIN. And it is also shaped a little differently than the factory. And I'll show you the factory. Well, we'll show you that a little bit later on. But it does have more of a mushroom shape than a square flat shape that the factory does. That allows the trigger bar to roll over it a little bit easier, less friction. Hence lightening the trigger. Doesn't affect the safety whatsoever. It does provide a lighter trigger pull. And the other thing we have is a lighter spring, because as you roll the trigger bar over top of that, you're depressing the spring, and the lighter the spring, the less you have to depress it. So it's pretty simple and pretty cool, because it all works when it's all done together. So I'm going to put the safety plunger off the side along with the trigger spring, because they go to the upper. And then we're going to go ahead now and just reassemble the lower part first. So the first thing we'll do is attach our spring to the trigger bar. You'll notice the hole underneath there. Let's see, there it is. Yep, this guy right there. And I'm going to go ahead and take the spring and just come up here. And again, keeping in mind, when I look at it, I want it to be an S shape, so I'm going to have the spring open like so. And I'm going to just hook it in there. Should be easy, and it is easy. There you go. And it's going to sit like that, and again, I can look at it, and I can see that S shape. The next thing I'm going to do before I even attach that is take my double diamond connector and drop it into the trigger housing. There's a slot right here where it rests. You'll see that it has a play there, but there's also a slot here where we press it in. So I can get it started and then just push it in with my hand, my fingers here. Okay, and we want to make sure that it is all the way seated. And now a lot of people say, well, gee, it's bent. Well, it is bent because it is a spring action on that, okay? So once you understand that as you pull it back, it wants to have that kind of action. Let's see here. You can see how it goes in and out. Because that in and out is what resets the trigger. So you want it to be bent a little bit. It's actually a 92-degree angle. So, all right, versus a straight 90. So it's just a little bit bent. Perfect. Okay, so now we want to attach the trigger spring to the trigger housing. So I've got it on the trigger bar already. So I'm going to come up here and take my little hook and hook it in here into play like so. Let's see here. Is this going to work the way I want it to? Yes, okay. Okay, now trigger bar is a little easier. Okay, so there it is. And this is how it fits. And again, to get it in there, you want to depress the spring, the same thing. So it's same when we bring it in here like that, just pull the spring out, and there we have it. Now this is a good time right now to actually lubricate in between the actual connector and the trigger bar. So I'll pull it out just a little bit. I'll take a little bit of this oil right here, and I'm just put a drop of oil right on top of the connector right here where the connector and the trigger bar will intersect. Now it'll migrate itself around a little bit. Now, you can actually oil this without taking the gun apart, and you would do that just by putting a drop of oil right underneath this little ear that you see sticking up, and it'll migrate itself down. But while we have it open, I figure, well, we might as well go ahead and do it. So I'm going to go ahead now, pull it out, and that's the motion we're looking for, right back and forth here. And I'll see if I can get you there. So that's what we're looking for. So we have a nice little lubrication there, and that's basically it for the actual trigger assembly into your connector. And you'll see there is a little spring pressure. Okay, so now let's go ahead and put it back together. It's really that simple. You know, I made it look a little bit more difficult, I think, but it is pretty simple. You're going to notice that the bar wants to push it out, so it doesn't really want to stay in a perfect alignment. But once you actually press it into the frame, it will line itself up. So we'll drop our trigger in there, get that compressed. Everything looks like it's going to fit. I'll drop it down, put that down, and push, and that sounded good. A little click there. That's good. Okay, so now that we have it in there, first thing I want to do is just install my trigger housing pin so I can lock it into place. So take the trigger housing pin. Now, you saw that I took the pins out from the left to the right. It's a kind of a personal preference, although it is also a, I guess years ago when I did some videos with some gunsmiths, they always said, hey, take the pins out from the left to the right. So I've always done that. We're going to put them back in the other way, from the right to the left. So I've got a nice little nylon head hammer. I'm just going to tap it in there and take my punch and actually true this up just a little bit so that each side is equal and it doesn't stick out and interfere with the grip whatsoever. It kind of is captured in there, captures the piece in there, and it does not protrude on either side. The other thing I want to notice too is that my trigger pin and trigger pin holes and how they line up. So if you can look inside this hole here, you'll see, let's see if I can get some light there, you go. You'll see the trigger wants to stick up like that, and so the hole's not there, but when I push it down just a little bit, all of a sudden the hole becomes a little bit more visible. And so the locking block will push it down somewhat, but you will notice as you go to put the trigger pin in, you may have to manipulate it a little bit, the trigger itself, just to get it to sit in the right spot. So next up is the locking block, and it will push it down just somewhat, like I said. So we take our locking block, you'll see your hole, that's your trigger pin hole. You'll see your slot, that actually takes the the locking block pin. So right there is a slot. So I'm going to just drop this down straight into the frame. And once I push down all the way, like I said, it kind of pushes the trigger down to the proper spot, but there's still a little bit of occlusion in there. So when I go to put the pin in, I need to press that down. Okay. Next up will be the locking block pin. Now, it's very important that you put the locking block pin in first because we want to capture the spring of the slide stop under this piece. Oftentimes, people will do this out of sequence and they'll put their slide stop in, put the trigger pin in, then go back and put this in, and the pin will live on top of the locking block pin. The pin lives on top of the, the spring lives on top of the locking block pin, which is not right because what happens then when you shoot, just the vibration of the gun makes this jump up and lock the gun back. So some people will go through this whole process, they'll put the gun back, they shoot it, they go, wow, it's locking back every time, what's going on? It's broken. It's typically based because they have the spring of that slide stop on top of the locking block pin. Now the locking block pin is tight. So I got it started with my hand, and I'm going to come up here with my nylon hammer again and just tap it and get it started. Now the nice thing about these nylon tips is that you can actually just beat on it as much as you want. You'll see that I can get it pretty flush here with a hammer, but if I look on the other side, it still has a little bit of room there. So what I'll do is take my punch and just true it up so each side is equidistant. Not like extremely necessary, but it makes it look better. How's that? And one more tap. That's better. So each side now looks like it's designed to be. Okay? Now, slide stop. There's a slot in the trigger that will go in there, and that hole is going to line up with the trigger hole, and the pin goes through the frame, through the trigger, and then through the slide stop. It captures all three pieces, and this is, again, where this notch will actually line up and capture the pin, so the pin doesn't walk out with vibration. And this slide stop has the proper spring action. So I was going to drop it straight in, like so, and I'll slide it forward, and you'll see, if you look in the hole, you'll see it kind of line itself up. And it does kind of come and stop right where it's supposed to be. The only thing I have to do now is push down on my trigger just a little bit just to make sure that the hole is fully lined up. So I'll go ahead and I'll keep my thumb kind of on that, and I'll get my thumb over here on the trigger itself, and I'll push the trigger bar down a little bit. I can start this by hand, and you'll see it goes in. Then the only, I'm going to start to get a little resistance over here when I get to this slide stop, and I can hopefully be able to just tap this in. Okay. And now we're going to true that pin up, and we may hear it click in place. And we did. Again, that click, if you didn't hear it, but there's a little click there. That is just the spring now catching into that notch. And so what we're looking for is this type of action on your slide stop. So it should have a spring action to it, and it looks good. And there is basically the trigger. So we can pull it forward, and it works. Good. All right, so there's the lower, and that's pretty simple installation for using your own trigger housing. While we're here, I'm going to go ahead and do the other parts as well, just because we're here. Why not? There's the factory trigger bar. I'll put that off the side. We're going to go ahead and install the striker spring or firing pin spring, the 3-pound firing pin spring. And then we're going to install also the titanium coated safety plunger that comes with the pyramid trigger, as well as the reduced power spring for the safety plunger. That's that little guy that's rolling around right here. Okay, so the first thing we do is take our guide rod out, and typically at this point I would actually change this plastic guide rod out with one of our tungsten guide rods, which is a much better animal than the plastic one. It's heavier, helps reduce recoil and muzzle flip. Take the guide rod out, push the barrel out, straight out like so, and there we go. And there's our slide. To access the striker and the safety plunger, we need to remove the slide cover plate. Slide cover plate is plastic. It's captured with spring pressure by the spacer sleeve that is around the striker. So to access the spacer sleeve, we want to make sure it's pulled back all the way. And we're going to go ahead and look inside here. Now, if you get inside here really close, you're going to see that there is a piece of plastic. It's black right there underneath the lug. That is spring loaded. So if I go in with a punch and I push down, see the spring pressure? I push down, hold it down, and then I can thumb off this slide cover plate. And we also make replacement slide cover plates as well. Now, once I have the slide cover plate off, I can lift off and pull on the striker lug, and out comes the striker assembly. So there's really several parts here. There's the actual striker itself, the striker spring, the spring cups which capture the spring onto the striker, and then what they call the spacer sleeve. So 1, 2, 3, and the little spring cups. And now, before I do too much more, let's go ahead and take the safety plunger out. And the safety plunger is also captured by the extractor, and the extractor is captured by the safety plunger, which is also held on to by this extractor depressor plunger. So I'm going to take this entire piece out. This is an assembly, but it's usually sold as is. The extractor depressor plunger itself is steel. The spring and then the actual detent is a plastic piece that goes inside the spring. Now, what's interesting is that 9mm detents are black. 40 caliber are white, and green is 45. So you can, I don't know why they always look exactly alike, but they do have different colors and they do have different things, and they probably have a different function. So that said, I'm going to just leave this piece as is. I'm not going to disassemble that whatsoever. We are going to now work on getting the safety plunger out of here and the extractor. So the way we're going to do that is just to depress the safety plunger with the punch, and the extractor is going to fall out. Voila. And there goes the safety plunger. Whoa. Luckily, I can see it. So be careful, because if you have shag carpet, you will lose it. All right. So there's the safety plunger, the factory safety plunger. And it has a spring that's kind of captured inside of it. And if you'll notice this real quick, the shape of these, this is what's different. And this is what makes ours a little bit better. The actual shape allows the trigger bar to roll over it easier with less effort and less friction, which then, of course, reduces the actual trigger pull. And, of course, our spring is a little lighter than the factory spring. So let me put that down. I'll put the factory part over here, and we'll get to that in just a second. Here's the slide. We'll put that down. Now we're going to go ahead and work on the striker assembly. This is a little tricky sometimes. And there's a trick to it, but what we're going to do is we're going to depress the spring with our fingers, and the spring cups are going to come off, or sometimes they fall off, sometimes you have to pull them off. So I've pulled all the way down, and I'm going to pull off our spring cups, and they are tiny, and you don't want to lose those because the gun won't work without them. Now, what's interesting, over the years, we've had many people call and order this $3 part, these $4, I think it's $3.99 for these little spring cups, because they lost one went flying, boom, boom, and of course, you can't work the gun without them. Once you take the spring cups off, the spring just comes right off, and there's the striker, and there's the spacer sleeve, okay? Now, in some of our kits, we actually sell them with a skeletonized striker. If you didn't get the skeletonized striker, it's no problem. You can still use your factory striker, and we're going to go ahead and put the spring back onto it, but we're going to use a lighter spring. Instead of the factory, which is about a 5.5, 6 pound spring, we're going to use the 3 pound spring, which will make the entire trigger pull much lighter. So the way we do that, the way you want to do this is to use your slide as kind of a guide. If I take the channel there for the firing pin, and I put the firing pin upside down with the spacer sleeve down into that piece, and I use the lug right there to capture the pin, then I can actually work on this without a third hand because that's my third hand. I'm going to take my spring, I'm going to just drop it over top. Now here's the tricky part. Have your spring cups ready and be prepared to depress the spring, put one spring cup on and the other spring cup. And the objective is to try to get this little piece of the spring cup. If you get in here close, you'll see this little ledge right here. We're going to get that inside the spring. There you go. All right. So I like to have these things sitting there just ready to go. And we'll push down on the spring all the way down and leave a little bit of space there so I can put my spring cup into the spring itself on the one side and then bring it on the other side. Oops, it just fell out. That wasn't good. Okay, got the one in. One side is good. Let me get this other side. Okay. There we go. All right. That's what we're looking for. Okay, now you'll see that there's, if you look really closely, you can see where the two cups come together. And the only thing we want to make sure is that when they come together, we're not at the end of one of the springs. And it looks pretty darn good to me right there, yeah. So that's what we're looking for. And now that we have this together, we can actually start to reassemble this. So the first thing we want to do is take our safety plunger and our extractor and get those installed. And again, like I said, the safety plunger captures the extractor captures the safety plunger. So we'll take our tiny little spring, drop it in here like so, and put the slide over top of it like this. Get it started. Put my thumb there to capture it. Now put my extractor back in, and you have to have this be halfway in and out. The extractor has a little barrel on it that goes straight in like so. Oops. And if all goes good, you just press the safety plunger and push in the extractor, and then they capture each other just like that. So again, this extractor would fall out if I depress that anymore. So I depress it past it and let it come back and capture the actual extractor. Now I can take my extractor depressor plunger. Now there's a right and wrong way to put this in. The steel piece goes in to intersect with the other steel of the extractor itself. So it goes in the hole, and you'll notice the plastic piece will stay out to intersect with the plastic slide cover plate. So I put those in like so, get my striker, put it in like so, push it all the way down, and they won't go all the way down because they are spring loaded, both these pieces. So now we get our slide cover plate, put it halfway into the slide up here in the back of the slide, and I'll take the back of the punch and I'm going to go ahead and push down the spacer sleeve just so I can get it started like so. And then I'm going to take the small end of the punch and actually push down the extractor depressor plunger, and there it is. And that's what you have. Now, to test this, you can actually depress the safety plunger, and the striker will come forward and extrude from the breech face right down in here. Let's see if we can get you a shot of that. There's the striker piece right there. And if I pull it back and I don't depress the striker, or excuse me, the safety plunger, it won't go forward. So that's one of the safety mechanisms. So this firing pin will not go forward unless the safety plunger is depressed. The safety plunger is depressed when you pull the trigger and the bird's eye rolls over top of it. So that's actually a very interesting and amazing safety feature that Glock came up with that kind of made this gun very simple, because it doesn't have an external safety, but it has an internal safety that will not allow the striker to go forward unless the trigger is pulled. And you can't pull the trigger unless you actually depress the safe action trigger piece. So there's really a couple of different things that are part of this situation that make the Glock a very safe gun, even though it doesn't have an external safety. So that said, we're now ready to go ahead and install the entire piece and check out our trigger. So, got that, all those pieces in there, barrel just drops straight in, and the guide rod will drop in as well. So we just drop it straight like so and compress that spring a little bit, get it into the nose ring, and get it to sit down where it's supposed to go. Now, many people say to me, well, gee, where does it go? Did it go, you know, because when I take my gun apart, it seems like it's on the top notch. It's supposed to rest on the bottom notch, the rounded part. When you take your gun apart, sometimes it'll jump down to that top notch. It's just the way it does. It's not good, bad, or anything. It's just the way it is. All right, so slide is assembled, the lower is assembled. We're going to go ahead and now put them back on. While I'm here, I can just drop a couple pieces of oil right here on my rails because there is metal-to-metal contact here. And a little bit of oil will never hurt. You don't need a lot, that's for sure. And on the back as well. Now, like I said, you can actually oil the connector if you wanted to by getting in here and actually putting a drop of oil right underneath this little piece right here. So if I can get in close there, see, it's just a little ear sticking up right there, that ear. I could put a drop of oil right there, and that would migrate itself down into the trigger bar and connector where they actually intersect. Okay, so there's the oil points there. Everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and put the slide back on the rails. Oh yeah. Okay, so it's done. Now here's a couple things to observe. Pyramid trigger allows you to have a shorter, crisper, lighter trigger pull. I'll use my left hand here so you can actually see it. So the trigger pull itself is shorter than the factory. The reset is extremely short, like crazy short. But that's adjustable if you want, but we like it. That's what's going to allow you to shoot double taps really fast because you don't have a long trigger pull. Now, you know, we're exaggerating long. It's long in the sense that it's longer than this one. With the factory's longer than this one. That's what the beauty of the pyramid trigger is it allows you to access the trigger with a shorter stroke, a lighter stroke, and then the reset is so much faster that you can actually manipulate the trigger faster and shoot faster. And here's the big bonus is because the trigger pull is shorter and lighter, you're less likely to disturb the sight picture as you pull the trigger. So that said, that is the pyramid trigger installation for those of you who receive the pyramid trigger without the trigger housing. And you can use your existing trigger housing just like I showed you here. I'm Lenny Magill. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being part of the Glock store. Come to Nashville, see the new store. It's fantastic. I think you'll really enjoy it. Hope to see you next time.